I've heard this where people say, you know, I don't believe in chiropractors. And I say, that's okay. This isn't a religion. To try to discharge their resistance.
Neither do I. Come on in.
Yeah. So when that little bit of resistance is discharged, the answer ultimately, and the answer, frankly, to all things in life is to be present, to listen with ears that hear, right? So when you're present with somebody and you listen to them with a great degree of attention, it's almost overwhelming to people.
Hello, everybody. This is the Winning in Winnipeg podcast, where I talk to top performing business owners, executives, entrepreneurs, athletes, and local Winnipeg celebrities. I get to learn who they are and how they think, and I get to hear their perspective about what's really going on in Winnipeg and in their businesses. On today's podcast, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Dr. Greg Koss, owner of Koss Chiropractic. Dr. Koss has studied the philosophies of Chinese medicine and acupuncture and has obtained a 3-year postgraduate specialty in physical rehabilitation at the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College in Toronto. To date, Dr. Koss is one of 2 chiropractic physical rehabilitation specialists practicing in Manitoba. There's actually way too much for me to tell you in this intro, so we're going to let Dr. Koss dive into it himself. Greg, thanks for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Now, that was a mouthful. However, what's more of a mouthful is when I dove into your credentials and your history and all of that, and I really we'd be here. I didn't have enough time in this show to go through them all.
You're too kind.
It's impressive.
Yeah. Is
that why you can fix people?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was thinking about this last night, how I'd approach this, but my modus operandi when I'm practicing is to be very good at what I do. Because it makes me feel better about, myself, I suppose. I like healing people as fast as humanly possible. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like a detective game of finding the fastest path to helping people get better. Yep. When I was an undergraduate student, just going back to the beginning, I was an undergraduate student at University of Winnipeg, and I studied psychology and philosophy. And then I switched my program halfway through my 4-year tenure there, mm-hmm. to science, and I studied biology and chemistry. And I always had a fascination with acupuncture when I was a kid. I wasn't planning on becoming a chiropractor when I first started out. I wanted to become a psychologist. And this is an interesting story, actually. My second year, I had a couple of friends who said, you know, your dad's a chiropractor, and the path is already laid out for you. And I kind of resisted that because I didn't want to be necessarily under the auspices of my father, right? I didn't want to have to practice under him in a sense, mm-hmm. But I knew that was a path. I mean, when I was 3 years old, my father would say to me, when you and I practiced together, like I didn't have a chance. Like I was destined to become a chiropractor, right? And my dad graduated at CMCC in 1960, and I was born in 62. And ever since my childhood, as long as I can remember, our family always focused on drug-free treatments and natural remedies to be better. Yep. And of course, physical medicine or physical work, right? So in my second year, I decided I finished 2 years at the time in university, studying those courses I mentioned earlier. And I was accepted to CMCC in Toronto, the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College, which is one of the more highly touted chiropractic institutions in the world. And I was very thankful to get in there. I felt, interestingly enough, from a psychological point of view, I didn't want to disappoint my father. So I put an immense amount of stress on myself to perform well. So I studied all the time. So 4 years of studying. When I left When I left Winnipeg, I weighed 184 pounds. When I came back at Christmas, I was 148 pounds. So there was a lot of stress and we studied a lot. And I lived in a dormitory with a bunch of guys, and we studied together, right? It was and there was this kind of social stress.
Were you a good student prior to that?
Yeah. My first year of university, I was still, kind of post high school party mode. And I didn't do very well in my first year of university. Okay. But then a gear shift. There was a change in my mind, and I wasn't going to be lesser than, I was going to be greater than. So subsequent to that, in my second year, I started performing, and third and fourth year, I never looked back. I don't think I scored less than an A in any course after my second year. Went off to CMCC, studied, always had a fascination with acupuncture. I came back to Winnipeg, and speaking to some of my history, I became one of the youngest members of the MCA Board of Governors in 1988. I graduated in 87. I joined the board in 88. I think I was on there for 4 years. Mm-hmm. So I was a director of the Manitoba Chiropractic Association. But back then it was really, really, ragtag. There's only about 80 guys in the province practicing, or 90 guys in the province. Okay. I guess after about 14 years of practice, I decided I wanted to acupuncture wasn't practiced by chiropractors because it was the market was largely exclusive to physiotherapists and medical doctors, and they wouldn't allow us to study with them. That was kind of a professional kind of boundary or barrier that was artificially created. And then CMCC, the Canadian Memorial College, started teaching acupuncture. So, and interestingly enough, with their program, it wasn't like the blind leading the blind. They had professors come in from Beijing School of Medicine that were in Toronto, and they taught us. So I learned from people, right from the fountainhead, right? So that took about 3 years, and it included about 300 to 360 hours of study. And you're studying a fairly broad swath of acupuncture. And the teacher that taught me, her name was Emily Cheng Ko. She was the main protagonist there. She took me under her wing. I was like one of the students in the class that she really enjoyed because I asked a lot of questions. And she's a Chinese medical doctor from Singapore. And she taught me a lot of peripheral stuff with respect to Chinese herbs and things like that. The basic education was in acupuncture, but she taught me and we learned about Chinese philosophy and it's a dialectic philosophy of yin and yang, as you know, hot and cold, up and down, in and out, this type of thing. She took me under her wing, taught me a lot about Chinese herbs. And I brought all that back to Winnipeg, really enjoyed that. Practiced for about 6 or 7 years with acupuncture, and then I decided to take a specialty in physical and occupational rehabilitation. And that actually wasn't out of CMCC. It was out of the United States, just to correct something you said earlier. I did gain my fellowship here because at that time there was reciprocity between the Americans and the Canadians. Okay. But the Canadians didn't have a rehab course. So I studied down in the States for 3 years. That was, that was a postgraduate course that you can't get in the city that you're in. And then I brought that back to Winnipeg after 3 years. This is an interesting story. I mean, to get your fellowship, you had to do a 3-hour oral exam at the end of 3 years of study, and you had to score higher than 75%. Incredibly stressful. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of information, and you have 3 doctors or 3 professors, peppering questions at you for three hours. Yeah, it was quite something. So the synergistic combination, if I can use that expression, between my basic education at CMCC, which I graduated one of the top people in my class, and I hope that doesn't sound immodest, and then I studied acupuncture, and then I studied physical and occupational rehabilitation on top of that, it really created a broad kind of understanding of how to manage physical conditions, on top of the fact that I was already standing on the shoulders of a giant like my father, right, who was a very successful chiropractor in Winnipeg. I mean, when I joined his practice, he had 34,000 patient files. So he had treated a broad swath of Winnipeggers at that time. And so here I am.
How different are your practicing modalities? Like, are you guys very similar, or are you very different?
Well, my dad didn't practice acupuncture, so that became a really nice adjunctive therapy that I could provide people. And with the help of Emily and the teachers that taught me, I have a much. It just adds a deep poetic insight into the human condition, the human physical condition in any event.
So what I should have started with was a little bit of why I'm excited to have you here, and just why I tell everyone about you is that when I first heard about you, somebody called you the Body Whisperer. And then a different person called you the Body Whisperer. I was like, who is this guy? Oh, you got to see Dr. Koss. Like, okay. So then when I finally saw you, and I don't know if I haven't really talked about it that much on the podcast, but I had a bad back tear, 16 years ago, and I'd seen so many different people, back specialists, APs, physiotherapists, surgeons. I never had surgery, chiropractors, everyone. 9 weeks with you, and I'm pain-free. And I've never had this level of, for 16 years, this level of comfort. And so, I'm blown away by some of the stuff we went through, some of the stuff you talked about, the things that we did to my back that no one ever has. And simply the results that we got was incredible. So there's probably a reason why you're rated #1 chiropractor on ratemd.com for Winnipeg.
Thank you, Dan. You're too kind. I mean, your story is the kind of story that makes me feel like I'm alive. It makes me feel purposeful, right? I think in every person's life, the one thing that should drive their lives is purpose. So when I hear stories like that, it makes me feel like I'm on the right path. And I have to, I have to thank my father for that. And my mother, she's a physiotherapist too. So I'm dyed in this color of physical treatment for people. Mm-hmm. Just to go back to another story, my father, before I became a chiropractor, I practiced in his clinic as an assistant, therapies and watching my dad practice for 3 years before I ever touched a patient. So I had already gained like an incredible intuitive insight into how to manage people and manage physical conditions, people's tolerances to pain, what to say, how to create expectations, this type of thing.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm telling this story is that when I was with my dad, he had like 10 or 15 books that were like the Bibles of physical medicine. Some written by chiropractors, some written by osteopaths, some written by orthopedic surgeons. The one treatment that you received that other people didn't provide for you is a treatment called transverse friction massage, which was extremely uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it was a treatment process that was developed by a fellow named James Syriac, who was an orthopedic surgeon in Britain back in the 1950s. And he created the treatment process. Now, a lot of practitioners won't do it because it's timely. It takes time. It's painful. It doesn't take that much time, but it's painful. And you have to have a lot of emotional equity with the patient in order to do what I did to you. Because you're when I'm creating pain, you're thinking, does this guy really know what he's doing? And it's done to overcome the chronic structural changes that take place in tissue when tissue is damaged. And I was thinking about this last night when I woke up in the middle of the night, thinking about what I would say and how I would kind of direct some of the interesting things that I do and that I understand that other practitioners may not understand. And this goes out to everyone who's practicing physical medicine. Chiropractors take care of in my opinion, take care of chronic capsular problems. And the capsule's that white ligament that sits around a joint. Now, joints are subject to strain when there's unbalanced muscle forces over a joint. And the way a chiropractic manipulation works, when you adjust a joint or you crack a joint or push a joint beyond its normal range of motion, it goes into what's called a paraphysiological range. And that causes this is very, very interesting, actually. It causes a neurological reflex in the joint that's being affected immediately. And like an explosion, other muscles that surround that joint, it decreases the intrinsic tone in those muscles. So, when you watch a pianist come on a stage and he cracks his knuckles before he plays, that releases the tone in his forearms so that he feels like his fingers are more limber. So when you adjust a joint, the segment that you're adjusting and the surrounding segments experience a decrease in muscle tone, which allow that segment to move better. And when segments move better, it generally reduces capsular strain. So when the capsular strain diminishes, a lot of neurological activity starts to diminish. And there's three types of receptors in a joint that are very, very important to the practice of chiropractic. One they're called mechanoreceptors or mechanical movement sensors. Yep. The other one are proprioceptors. These are position sensors. And the final one they're called nociceptors. Nociceptors are irritation receptors. So if a ligament is damaged or the fascia around a joint is damaged or under excessive load, or peak over a load that is considered reasonable, the patient will experience subjectively, they'll experience pain in that segment. But the most important thing to understand is that nociception coming out of a joint causes the muscles around a joint to tighten. So often people will have a ligament problem that creates muscle tension problems. And that's a neurological reflex. So people think, I went and saw the massage therapist. Well, the massage therapist, with the greatest respect, is treating the effect of a ligament problem rather than the cause itself. So what chiropractors ought to do is correct the mechanical stress around that joint. So in a marriage of things, I will do things that are very physiotherapeutically orientated, like do long levered stretching of muscles, so that there's balance around the joint, which I've done with you, to create an atmosphere for decreasing capsular irritation. So when joint capsule irritation diminishes, nociceptive information decreases. Proprioceptive information, that's position sense, improves. So people gain, and mechanoreceptors, they just function better with the joints above and below them. So it basically creates a concerted change in general mechanical function and neurological function. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely does.
Now, I've coined a term from social psychology or sociology. It's called recidivism.
Okay.
Now, when people have, it doesn't fit perfectly, but it fits reasonably well.
Yeah.
When people have a mechanical problem for a long time, like you did,
yeah.
they have their nervous system is adapted to that problem.
Yeah.
And many people suffer with a phenomenon called central sensitization. So, for example, if you have a capsule that's irritated for a long time, your nervous system increases the gain or the sensitivity in the nervous system around that location so that it's more sensitive to any change. So even if there's a whisper of change, if the wind changes direction, your back gets sore. Because I'm exaggerating, but the point being is that tissue becomes more sensitive to any stimulation than it would otherwise. If the tissue was normal, it wouldn't be as oversensitive.
Yeah.
So there's also what we call biomechanical recidivism, in the sense that cartilage changes contour, muscles change length. They actually change structurally. They'll develop little fibrous adhesions in them if they've been under load for a long period of time. So, for example, if you have a tight muscle for a long period of time, the actual structure of the muscle changes and forms a kind of a crossed-fibered matrix. I said, like, you're a home builder. If a window gets blown out and the contractor comes, he goes, well, we got to deal with that so the elements don't get in. So you see these cartoons where they hammer wood up in front of a window in a kind of a haphazard way.
Yep.
That's what happens in tissue. You get a crossed-fibered matrix, or interstitial scarring, if you will. And that creates a structural contracted change in the tissue that has to be made more pliable, as I did with you, where you have to rub like hell on that tissue to basically tenderize it or to make it more pliable.
I was a piece of meat there on the table.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it did not feel great. I'll tell you that much. But at the same time, no one had ever done it to me, and it clearly worked. So it was, I can't complain. I'm all about results. I don't care how we get there. Just make me feel better. And you did.
Yeah. Well, the reason that we managed to correct you, as I do with other people, is you have to have, frankly, like a kind of an unbridled confidence in providing a vision to people of what is possible if I do what I have to do, because they have to go through a little bit of hell to get there, and you go through there, and you manage to go through that crucible, and you can experience the spoils of a heavenly experience subsequent to that, or a pain-free experience after that.
Well, what I really liked, your process was, so not only, and we'll talk about the difference between you and other chiropractors, but your process was a bit different. And what I really liked, and probably what I can take into my business too, is you consistently made me analyze where I was and then where I am right now, and then reminded me where we're going, right? So it's very similar to even sales or marketing, that thing of just saying, like, here's where you are now, here's where you were, here's where we want to go. Let's get you there. How do we get you there? But you kept asking me, does it feel better or worse? Or, remember how you felt, and this is what you said before, and now this is what you're saying. People forget all the time. And so what I think you did a very good job is keeping me kind of on that path of just like, no, it may not feel great now, but here's we'll say the KPIs or the key performance indicators that we're tracking, of your pain, whether it's in your hip or your back or, your movement, even different ways. Like, I didn't feel great one day, and you're like, well, your movement's even better than it was the other day. So you did a very good job on keeping me, and me not thinking like, oh, well, this isn't working, 3 weeks in or 4 weeks in. And I think that's probably one of the big things too, or the battles of having people buy into what you're doing and then stay on the path, and then making sure that they're doing what they're doing.
Well, I appreciate that observation. Thank you. You're right, because it's interesting to me. I'll say to people, interesting to me and demonstrative to the patient. Bend backward, lean this way, lean that way. You can see that that's improved. Indeed, I'll do that while I'm treating them. And so you can have them, and it's a little bit time consuming because you say, well, stand up now, bend this way, bend that way. And they can see that it's improved. Frankly, I do that more early on in the treatment process.
Yeah.
So that as I say, you can develop that emotional equity, and they recognize two things. A, they're improving, and B, you're interested in their improving.
That's right.
So that creates a kind of, an emotional buy-in, if you will.
Right. I don't feel like you are like other chiropractors, and I've told you that, multiple times. So what is the big, I feel like when I think about other businesses, it makes sense to me. Not all home builders are the same, clearly. Not all lawyers are the same. But when I talk to people about chiropractors, it's, well, I went to see one, so I'm not going to see any other ones. What is the biggest, what do you think the biggest difference is between, why do I feel so different other than you making me, I actually got the result I wanted. I'm pain-free. So I suppose that could be different, but what differentiates you the most from other chiropractors?
It's hard for me to comment on that.
Okay.
I can't comment on the motivations of other people.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, but I can comment on my motivation. And as I mentioned earlier, my motivation is singular to know what the problem is, to demonstrate the problem to the patient, doing physical work, and then to fix it.
I like it.
That's what the motivation is.
I try not even call you a chiropractor when I describe you to people, because whether they have a positive or negative viewpoint of chiropractors, I just think my experience was so different that I try not to lump you in with those things. Whether I don't know if that's good or bad, and you've never told me if it's good or bad. So I hope I'm not hurting your brand equity. But at the same time, I try to describe you more as like he's going to fix your pain. That's how I feel, anyways.
I think that I'll consider that a kind of a compliment. I suppose.
We'll take it as a win.
Yeah. Take it as a win. Yeah. I mean, I really, really, really enjoy fixing people. I'd like to tell you a story, and this speaks to the a little bit of the interprofessional jealousy and some of the not resentments, but interprofessional jealousy. I had a young lady, and I can't mention any names. She was a ringette player, had fallen awkwardly on the ice, and then developed this shake in her hands. Right, there's fasciculation. It's a gross fasciculation. She couldn't stop. Her hands were shaking, and she had come in to see me 6 weeks after this had developed after falling on the ice. And her mother showed me the video of her falling, and I said. She had been diagnosed with a post-concussion syndrome. And concussions involve, for example, a fairly high velocity, changes in velocity, where your brain hits the side of your skull. And I looked at the video and I said, well, that's not a concussion. I said, there must be something else at play here. My colleague actually wanted me to come in and take a look at her because he wasn't quite sure how to manage this. He's younger than me, and he hasn't seen a lot of as many things as I have in 37 years. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, no, okay, this is very, very interesting because it requires a tremendous amount of intuition and information in your brain to be able to see the outcome of this. She had 2 MRIs, 1 CAT scan. They couldn't see any disc lesion in her neck. And I may be wrong at this point, but I can tell you what I did is I fixed her. So I said to her mother, well, I'm suspicious that she has congenital central stenosis in her neck, and that she just has a little bit of a central disc prolapse in her neck at about C3, C4, C5, C6, somewhere in there. And it's just irritating her spinal cord enough that she's got, this is called an upper motor neuron fasciculation. And I said, I suspect if I distract her neck gently, if I just pull her neck gently, that fasciculation will stop. And of course, she's seen several specialists. I'm not taking anything away from them because there's reasons that she wasn't able to be diagnosed. And I had her lie down, and she could see that the fasciculations are in her hands. And I just gently grabbed the back of her neck, her skull, and just gently tractioned her neck, and the fasciculation stopped. Which was an indication that whatever was irritating her spinal cord was not giving her pressure any longer. So I said simply that all we have to do is just give her a little bit of traction, a little bit of axial traction, and see if we can centralize the disc problem that's causing this fasciculation. This is all within 15 minutes. Okay, this girl she was told she probably wouldn't play ring out again in her life. And the physicians at the time said that it's a psychological thing.
Oh, crazy. I
said, well, and of course I reiterated while I was treating the patient to the mother and the daughter, well, you see how that fasciculation stopped? Has my traction in your neck created a psychological change in you? to bring the horse to water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, no. I said, yeah. And so I said, well, if I distract this and we get whatever's irritating our spinal cord centralized, then the symptoms should abate. So I said, do you mind if I traction your daughter's neck gently? We're going to hear a little clunking sound or a little bit of movement in there. And she said, of course, they were a little nervous about it. Tractioned her neck. Indeed, you hear a little deep clunking sound. All the fasciculation stopped. She's lying there perfectly still. She sat up. No symptoms. I said she has to avoid flexing her head in the next 2 or 3 days because that disc is unstable presently and it'll stabilize with time. But I would avoid, playing ring at least until next week and come into next week and we'll just see how she's managing. Well, she went back to the physical medicine specialist, the concussion specialist, and they said, we saw a chiropractor and her symptoms went away. And the physical medicine specialist said, oh, it's just the placebo effect. Just the placebo effect. Wouldn't throw the dog a bone, right? And recognize that something had changed. Now, I profoundly changed the direction of that young lady's life that day in, 15 or 20 minutes. No MRIs, no more radiation, no more CAT scans.
Yep.
Now, you have to have, in order to know that that's going to take place, you have to have prognostic vision. You have to have been to the top of the mountain to see to the other side. And I had seen this before. Yeah. And I can't tell you how satisfying it is to change somebody's life in 15 minutes like that. Yeah. Now, because we're not cutting somebody with a knife or we're not doing, excising a brain tumor, it's not quite as dramatic. Other people would say, oh, it's all BS or, it's just the placebo effect. But something tangibly changed in that girl's body and in her life in a very short period of time. Yeah. That's what gives me satisfaction. Yeah. And I do it over and over again. And this is what I've done for you.
Yeah. Well, you're making me look better because I send people to you.
No, I appreciate that.
And you make them feel better. Yeah. And then I look good. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
It's amazing.
It is. And unfortunately, when you're put when you're higher on a pedestal, there's a longer way to fall off. Sure. So, yeah. I feel the weight of the responsibility for taking care of people like yourself. And the people that are referred to me, I'm not perfect. Yep. So sometimes I might be busier and somebody might not like my personality or think I'm overconfident or whatever the case may be. But I try to find the sweet spot between too much and too little. Sure. The Goldilocks treatment, not too hot, not too cold.
Yeah. You took over, so you worked with your dad for a while, then you took over the business. How are the family dynamics of working in a family clinic and then superseding the previous owner?
Well, that's a weighty question, isn't it?
I got a few of them.
So I would say that of course, there's psychological dynamics between a successful man like my father and myself. And I must say, I felt, again, the weight of my responsibility to rise to his pedigree. So it motivated me to study more, to take on more political positions within my profession, to learn more, to stand on the shoulders of this giant, and to see further. So I would say that my dad, and he taught me everything that I know, except the acupuncture and some of the rehab stuff. But mostly, what my dad did is he was a mentor and provided me a motivation or that sense of purpose, like that desire to be better, be best. Psychologically speaking, I would say that at any time when a father is working under a son, you're obviously standing in the shadow of a blazing sun. So it requires a lot of mental fortitude and and concentration, motivation to kind of rise to that occasion.
Yeah.
I would say, my dad, his strength diminished with age, as many people do, and I thank God he's still in this world. So I don't know if I would say I've ever superseded him, but I've certainly carried the mantle. There is a time when you're aware, and the student becomes not the master, but becomes the teacher eventually, and that's because the teacher needs to retire, rest. Right, he's done his job, and now my obligation is to teach. Not my obligation, but my joy is to teach people that want to learn from me.
Yeah.
The young fellow that I have working with me now, Dr. Stevens, he's spectacularly it creates a congruency in the clinic because he's not quite as dramatic as I am, and but he's very steadfast, and he's very, very bright, and he's very good, but he's gentler than I am, both psychologically and physically. But he is stuck with me by hook or by crook, and now he knows everything I know, and except for the odd outlying thing that I might come in and give him some gentle advice on.
Yeah.
But this young lad is super bright, super effective.
Did you always get along with your father? You said that you originally wanted to be a psychologist. Did you guys get along growing up?
My father has a strong personality. I'm the brackish expression of my father and my mother. My mother's much more. My mother's much gentler and much more. She's gentler. My dad's vigorous. So I am, frankly, a combination of those two things. So at times I can be very, John Koss-esque, and other times, I'm much gentler and passive like my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a perfect thing, a perfect kind of chemical experience, a chemical reaction between two people to create what I am.
We'll take it.
Yeah, you're too kind.
So for anybody that's kind of sees themselves in any situation or any timeline of your life, so whether somebody's taking over a clinic or they want to go into chiropractic or they're already in it and they own a clinic or anything like that, what was the hardest part of taking over the clinic versus what the hardest part is now?
The hardest part of taking over the clinic was trying to find your own style, your own path, right? My dad's style was this is the easiest way to say it. My dad's style, I think, was more paternalistic, and mine was much more fraternalistic or fraternal. So he would come off more like a father giving advice, and I would come off more like a brother giving advice.
That's fair.
So that is I could say to this day that is when I'm treating people, I try to be, although I am getting older, I talk to the younger people more paternalistically now than I did, but I would say that fraternal style lasted a lot longer than the paternal style that my father had.
Right. It's like when you're telling me I'm an idiot for trying to lift really heavy weights.
Yeah, well, it's usually your brother that would tell you that, not your father. Like, don't be silly and be lifting heavy weights.
That's very kind of you to put it that way.
Yeah.
Where do you find most of your clients come from?
Well, two things. I think word of mouth, but lately, because of internet-oriented things like Raid MDs, I think a lot of people read what people say about me and then want to come and find out, who's standing behind the green door.
Right.
Maybe it's not the green door, the green curtain.
Curtain?
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yeah.
What do you find when people come in? Do you find that there's common misconceptions or stuff that they don't understand about what they're about to get into?
Yeah, entirely. So people will hear things and they'll say, "Go see this guy. He's going to help you," and then they come in with some degree of skepticism. And I've heard this where people say, "I don't believe in chiropractors," and I say, "That's okay. This isn't a religion." Mm-hmm. To try to discharge their resistance. And then
neither do I. Come on in.
Yeah. So when that little bit of resistance is discharged, the answer ultimately, and the answer, frankly, to all things in life is to be present, to listen with ears that hear, right? So when you're present with somebody and you listen to them with a great degree of attention, it's almost overwhelming to people. Because I'm speaking more existentially than professionally, that people often in their lives don't run into people that are as interested in them as I might be with some of my patients, listening to them. Sure. So when you listen to them and they feel like they're finally being heard, mm-hmm. sometimes it can be incredibly overwhelming for them in the sense that they feel a burden, taken off their shoulders. Mm. And I try to give them rest. So you basically did go into psychology. Well, that's it. That's an interesting observation. And my father said that to me as well. He said, when you're treating people on a day-to-day basis, you can incrementally talk to them. They're going to talk to you about what their problems are. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, probably the biggest answer to a lot of people's problems socially is just to be heard. Mm. A lot of people are alone. A lot of people don't have anybody to share their thoughts with. And a lot of people certainly there's not many people that can unburden them from pain. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. Mm. There was a time where I kind of took a turn in the way that I approached people. And I have an auntie that when you're with her, it feels like you're the only person in the room. Perfect. And she is just dialed into you. Mm. And I grew up with her doing that, but I never really understood it until I thought of like, why do I feel this way? Why do I really like talking to this person? And that actually understanding that took me to the other side of just understanding when people aren't present with you and aren't paying attention and their focus is everywhere. They're looking left and right. They're on their phone. They're, everywhere. And so I really tried to start listening and being there with people. Once again, I too am very imperfect. So my wife may tell me that I'm not often present. Yeah. But when I want to give somebody my full attention, it is, it really makes a difference when you're listening to somebody, truly listening. This is true. Interestingly enough, it speaks to a philosophical phenomenon of dissolving your ego. So this is a Buddhist phenomenon. But when you pay attention to other people with a spectacular intensity, you aren't attending to yourself. Mm-hmm. And we experience these types of experiences in the throes of having peak experiences, sexual ecstasy. You're not thinking about yourself in those moments, and those are the most profound moments of life. So our obligation, it seems, to humanity is to listen without prejudice, and to give people their voice. I don't necessarily need a voice to do what I do, but people need to speak and to be heard. It also makes me think of the word boredom and we talk to my son
often about how to fix boredom. And I think I heard that the cure for boredom is curiosity.
Totally.
And I don't know how many times we hear the word "I'm bored" or the phrase "I'm bored." And it's like, okay, it's because you're not listening, you're not paying attention, or you're not curious enough about something, you know?
This speaks to the importance of being a parent. And you see, your son will learn, it seems to me, and I hope I don't sound like I'm pontificating, but your son will learn about curiosity by watching you. So when you show him that you have a fascination with something, and you have joy in diving deep into building homes or talking to people, he'll see that, and that's what he virtually or ultimately will become. And that curiosity will provide him a sense of purpose.
I want my son to go into Jiu Jitsu. I've always wanted to do Jiu Jitsu. I think Jiu Jitsu is one of the greatest things as far as confidence,
discipline,
agility, discipline, protecting yourself, self-defense. I think it's incredible. Now, because of my back for the last 16 years, I've always been scared of it. I've never wanted to roll and bend my body in ways that would just cripple myself. But I've been trying to get my son to go into jiu-jitsu. And I was listening to Jocko Willink, and he was saying, he's like, well, the best way to get your kid into jiu-jitsu is clearly doing jiu-jitsu yourself. And I'm trying, damn it. Ugh, all right. So
you just have to approach it more gently, I think. But
yeah, I think my approach to things is slowly starting to slow down a little bit. I'm not really going at things 150% anymore, or just approaching a little smarter. Take the gym, for example. I'm not trying to lift, 8,000 pounds all at once. So that helps. But I have found that, I'm getting a bit smarter as far as not hurting myself.
Well, pain makes you think, and thinking makes you wise. I didn't. That's not my line, by the way. It's Confucius.
Do you have you ever considered yourself entrepreneurial, or what made you want to take over the clinic? What made you want to have the clinic rather than just working under someone else?
Well, clearly. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the entrepreneurial spirit comes from wanting to have your vision seen, creating a vision and making that your space, right? Mm-hmm. So at my clinic, I really worked on. People will say to me, I just like coming in here and sitting in here. The music, the atmosphere, the Chinese would say the feng shui. It's important to me that people come there and feel like they can rest. Mm-hmm. The entrepreneurial spirit, I think it was to practice in the place that I wanted to be, and that I would invite other people to be and enjoy being in. Mm-hmm. Whether I'm there or not, or whether I'm working on them or not. So, I mean, obviously, if people are in pain, they're coming there for that reason. I haven't, just to digress for a moment, I have had, both my children all my children have studied Taekwondo. Oh, nice. And that's created a certain, light degree of discipline in them. I've still got to rein them in a little bit, but they have a certain kind of physical presence that they wouldn't had, or physical confidence that they wouldn't have had they not studied Taekwondo. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. So it's a beautiful thing to see in your children, for sure.
I once did a Filipino martial art called Sunpa, mm-hmm. or also it's kind of akin to Sikaran. And it was a bunch of Filipinos and myself and my two brothers. Well, we were about a foot taller than everyone else, and we're the three white boys in this school, and it was awesome. They took us in like family back in Saskatoon, and that was my first foray into martial arts. And then I've done quite a few others after that, but never got into jiu-jitsu. And I think everyone should be able to control their body and understand fulcrums and levers and leverage and just how to protect themselves. And one of the big things is not panicking when you are in a compromised position. That's a big one with my son, who just like starts to panic when I'm on top of him or when we're wrestling or something like that. So to like the mental game of it is, I think, one of the most powerful lessons that you learn in it.
I think that's extremely insightful. And if you take it one step further, there's physical regulation, right? Being able to control you know what your capacities are and know where the boundaries are of your physical capacities. But there's also emotional regulation. And I don't know if it was Jordan Peterson I was listening to recently, but he said that, or it might have been him, but it might have been some other psychological pundit philosopher. But learning to have emotional regulation is singularly the most important quality of being a human. And this gets back to having presence. Because when you have good emotional regulation, it allows you to discard your ego for a period of time and be present with people that need you to be present.
Yeah.
Emotional regulation. Physical regulation, emotional regulation. You get those things together, and you've got a winning combination there.
Yeah.
And to digress again for a moment, one of the things that I do is just show people that are your age or my age that you're not 20 years old any longer, and you don't need to be doing planks for 15 minutes. There's no adaptive reason to do that. It's just, you think half of what drives my some of the realizations I provide for people is like, what did people do 3,000 years ago? We haven't changed physically, arguably, in 300,000 years of evolution. Now, some people say slightly more, some people say slightly less. If you're Christian, you might say 10,000 years. But the point being is we haven't changed that much.
Okay.
So, the important behaviors of lifting and bending, like you wouldn't get people generally human beings carrying a steel bar on their shoulders with big weights on either end at any time in human history, except for very, very few people that would, probably hold the weight closer to their body. I'm a proponent of reasonableness, if you will, when you're working out. Don't do heavy squats with weight on your shoulders. How many white collar guys need to do that, or white collar women?
Here's a joke. How many CrossFitters does it take to build a pyramid?
How many?
I have no idea, but you can imagine how fast it would go up compared to the slaves back then. I don't know. It's not a funny joke, but it just came to mind. Did you have jobs growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started, my first job was at the Hickory House.
What's that?
It was a restaurant on Ronald and Portage. I was 15 years old. I was paid, I had a beard. I was very precocious. I had a kind of a beard, and I went in there, applied for the job, and I told him I was 15, and I think he didn't want to give me the job. I had to get permission from my parents. They paid me $2.80 an hour to be a dishwasher. Extremely valuable experience, because I knew that I didn't want to do that the rest of my life. So I worked very hard, and I made enough money to, kind of fix up my old 66 Barracuda that my dad had given me. And then I worked at the Holiday Inn in Kenora. I worked at the Holiday Inn in Winnipeg as a front desk clerk. I started my own landscaping business in Winnipeg with a friend of mine from the University of Winnipeg. And we were quite successful. I had a job as a Dutch elm inspector in university. I worked for the province for a short period of time. And then I worked with my father. So those are principally the jobs I've had, I think. If I look back on it, I can't think of anything else at the moment.
I think that's an incredible thing that you said about, I knew what I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that for young kids coming out, just trying things, just working, just doing things to learn about what you don't want to do is just as important as finding what you want to do. I thought that same thing. I worked up on the rigs in northern Alberta, and I knew this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. That was a big realization. I had that same realization framing in the winter. And I was building a house, and it was like minus 28, and my hands didn't work, and I was on top of a roof, and I was just like, this is not, no, I don't want to do this. And so, yeah, there's so many things. Just the act of doing, actually doing things, going out and experiencing life in the world, and it can teach you so much about what you want and what you don't want.
You're exactly right about that.
Like that's phenomenal. I do have a question about your where you find the greatest amount of we'll call it an ROI on your focus and your time and energy. So where have you found the biggest impact or results in your life when you focus on something?
Well, if I can answer that question quite broadly, I would say that learning is an extremely valuable commodity, if you will. You can never, ever lose by learning more, right? So when you're young and you learn a lot, as you get older, you don't have to learn necessarily at the same concentrated rate, but the amount of understanding seems to grow exponentially, even by changing a little lens in front of your eyes when you're 30, when you're 35, and having a different perspective on everything you've learned in the past. Mm-hmm. But I can say that the years that I put in studying extremely hard, both with chiropractic, my undergraduate degrees in philosophy and psychology and in chemistry and biology, and then with chiropractic, and then with acupuncture, and then with physical and occupational rehabilitation. Your understanding of things doesn't grow arithmetically, it grows exponentially. So return on investment is investing in yourself, investing in your own mind, investing in learning whatever it is that you find joy in and whatever you find purpose in. Mm. That's exactly what I did. In fact, my father said to me at one point in time, "You've done all these things. This is interesting, getting back to our conversation about my dad. You've learned all these things. You've done all these political things. You've risen to the top of your profession politically, not right to the very top, because I didn't think that I had the will to be at the very top. I didn't want to be the guy that was the president. And Lord knows I may not have even chosen to be the president. But my dad said, invest money in yourself, your brain, your mind, and your understanding of yourself. So he suggested I see a psychologist to kind of gain insight into my own personality and the things that motivates me. Mm. And I will say that sharing my thoughts with somebody who could keep up with my ruminations, and the way I think was extremely valuable to me. And the fellow that I've been seeing in Winnipeg is extremely bright, and so he gives me insight into my personality, which allows me to even understand myself better. Yeah. But, you take that, and then I have good friends and acquaintances that I sit and chat with. And, for example, guys at the Winnipeg Squash Club that we socialize with, a very, very eclectic and eccentric bunch of people that are successful, speaking of entrepreneurs. And it's a great place to get that feedback, as to how you're doing from a business point of view, or from a social point of view, if you will. Yeah. I mean, it's not that specific, but it's a generalized feeling of understanding that develops there. Mm-hmm.
Getting a different perspective is definitely important.
Huge.
So I learn I realized that I'm not that quick. I don't learn very quick. I have to make the same mistake multiple times in a row before I'm like, oh, that wasn't too smart.
Well, you're very modest, but I think that might have something to do with being stubborn rather than not being quick.
I am quite stubborn.
Yeah,
I will give you that.
This is my point.
Yeah. No, I'm not. But so for me, that my first foray into therapy or self-analyzation and awareness and everything, I went down to it was very akin to a Navy SEALs Hell Week. It was called Warrior Week. And it really was just a different experience than I'd ever thought of, different perspectives on every viewpoint, every idea that I've ever had in my life. And they just challenged every thought I've ever had. The Hell Week kind of started with breaking down the body first, right? And it was very akin to the military, where they tire you out, so you physically cannot fight back to these reprogramming, and then after you're really tired, then they start to talk to you and get into your head, and so that was my first foray into that, and that's crazy. Understanding different perspectives and how even our minds work, and how we can focus our minds and with different stories and different perspectives, and we can create just from our ideas.
Perfect.
Like it is incredible, and I think that ties in completely with the body, the mind, like it's all tied together, which brings me into nutrition and minerals and vitamins. And, you have your own line of vitamins, and
I've just started, in fact,
doing that.
Yeah.
What brought you into that realm?
Well, I hate to bring my father up again, but I'm being facetious. He has a tremendous interest in that stuff. So, I mean, I naturally gravitated towards understanding, vitamin supplementation. He's a testament to vitamin supplementation. He's 88 years old, extremely healthy, except for a kind of a genetic proclivity towards cardiovascular problems, which is hard to dodge. But healthy, present, clear. And he is a testament to the value of taking nutrients. There are certain nutrients that are undeniably important in this world.
Okay.
Probably, I mean, my favorite go-to nutrient is the deficiencies of magnesium, which is epidemic in our society, and vitamin D. So, but speaking generally, I'm fascinated by how they can have a profound, almost pharmaceutical effect. But if you're consistent with nutrients that you're taking in, it helps to, for example, mitigate the development of. Every day we create free radicals in our body from oxidization. And you can lessen the effects of free radical development in your body by taking nutrients that are free radical scavengers, for example, like vitamin C. You don't get an immediate change from it, but over a period of 20 years, if you're consistently supplementing yourself or making sure that you've got that available to your body, whether it's through eating fruit or anything that has vitamin C in it, or just taking a supplement. The nice thing about taking supplements is it's quantifiable. So you can say that one tablet's got 500 milligrams of vitamin C, and you can know every day if I take one tablet, I'm going to get 500 milligrams of vitamin C. And there's often criticism of that. Well, you just get expensive urine. Well, that may or may not be true, but the simple fact is it's there.
And I don't have scurvy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Or you won't develop a deficiency of that particular nutrient.
Yeah.
Magnesium has an effect in my practice. People have, and that's where I started. That's where I first started with nutrients. Is I created a a vitamin that has magnesium and vitamin D that helps the absorption of vitamin D, and magnesium also helps to activate the effects of vitamin D.
Do you tie that in with K2?
No.
At all? No?
Not yet. I mean, the K2, you're kind of, that speaks more to bone density and things like that.
Okay.
But the vitamin D and the magnesium helps to improve muscular function and muscular tenderness. Indeed, when I wrote my fellowship paper for physical and occupational rehabilitation, I did a case study on 2 cases on the supplementation with magnesium and how it improved pain tolerance in tissues. So you use this little pain algometer, it's called an algometer, and you push up against trigger points or tender points in the body that are already mapped out. And then you measure, the patient measures, there says between 1 and 10 how they feel. And so you do this over a period of 3 or 4 weeks. And with supplementation of magnesium, it reduces their pain perception and their pain tolerance in tissue. It improves their pain tolerance in tissue by 50 to 70% over a very, relatively short period of time. People clinically, when they have, subjectively, when they have magnesium deficiencies, as their muscles will ache, they'll feel stiff. And often this is actually quite fascinating. There's 2 things we should probably talk about. One is that most lower back pain, the vast majority of lower back pain is self-inflicted, and it's usually related to passive behaviors like sitting in a soft chair.
Okay.
So I could say safely between 60 and 90% of the population sitting in front of the television most nights for 2 hours watching television.
Do you not put like office work and
that too? But
right?
the difference is you're conscious. So a lot of people will be watching television and they're passively conscious, if you will, but they fall asleep often sitting in their chair. So there's an epidemic of central stenosis, which is a condition where you get structural changes inside your spinal canal related to overstretching your tissue from falling asleep in flexion or falling asleep with your legs up on a chair, right? Puts a tremendous amount of load on your lower back. I could safely say that if people stretched a muscle in their abdomen called the psoas, if they didn't fall asleep in their chairs and they sat up straight with good back support watching television at night, they took a little bit of magnesium, the number of people that suffer with lower back pain, and this is a billion-dollar industry, would go down precipitously. So instead of taking pain-relieving medication, they can change their behavior and change their lives, right?
Yeah.
So getting back to the nutrient thing, my father wrote a book called Superstar Nutrients. He just loved this, right? So he would go through. And he's a student of a company down in the States called Life Extension Foundation, and he reads voraciously the stuff that they put out and stuff on the internet. And he basically distilled that for people to read. He's written a book called Superstar Nutrients. You can see it on Amazon if you like. Very proud of it. I'm proud of him for writing this book, and people love reading it because it's got a kind of a news broadcasting style about it. It's not written like a narrative style, like where you have to read through pages and pages of 5-syllable literature to get an idea. He's got basic ideas that he tries to give people so that they can improve their health. And I said to my dad, look, I'll use the title of your book, Superstar Nutrients, and that's what I'll call the company that produces the nutrients that I'm going to provide for people. Mm-hmm. And the first nutrient that I decided to manufacture was magnesium bisglycinate.
Fantastic.
It is. It's the start, and I'm doing this as a kind of a ground, like an organic type of growth thing. I'm not gonna, like, I'm not going out there making 10 nutrients and trying to schlep this stuff on people to try to make money. It's not my interest. My interest is to grow organically. And if it allows me to give more money to my children, or, in the future, or, I'm not going to retire by this money, but it will leave a legacy of health for either my family or for the people that follow what I've created. So
that's your advice to people with lower back pain. What kind of advice would you give to just the average Joe Schmo? No crazy pain yet, we'll say, but general tightness, they don't do much.
Easy.
Yeah, for health. Like
this is totally the total basics. Okay, the things that cause muscular stiffness or pernicious to muscular tissue are coffee. Excuse me, you take that off, please. Coffee, dark colas, right? Because there's phosphoric acid and caffeine in it, which are pernicious to the divalent ion. And
I drink so much coffee.
I'm just saying.
So much.
Okay, the dark colas, tea, distilled water, emotional stress, and alcohol. Emotional stress, it heightens the level of a chemical in our body called cortisol and aldosterone, and that pushes divalent ions off. Distilled water has no salt in it. And I hope nobody in the water industry is going to get upset with me, but there should be supplementation with divalent ions, calcium, magnesium, selenium, zinc, yada, yada, yada.
You're going to have the pharma. You're going to have
they're going to be
the
burning down the
sodas
house.
And now the water industry.
Just bleep those out, please.
All at me.
So what happens is, you see, the good Lord provided us with water on this earth. It was either standing water on land, river water, brackish water as it met the ocean, well water. It's arguable that all of these come off the land, right? Now, surely some people, drank rainwater from time to time. I get that, but the vast majority of the water that was consumed over the last 300,000 years of human evolution had solutes in it, salts, right? And calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, yada yada yada. So when we consume water that has no salts in it, it is pernicious. So it demineralizes you over time.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, I can see
coffee because of the xanthine acids in coffee. It pushes off magnesium and caffeine.
I drink coffee that's free of xanthan acid.
Yeah, sure you do. Yeah, tea, same thing. Tannic acid and caffeine is in tea. So these are go-to consumptive things that people take every day. I mean, many people know tea or coffee or dark colas.
Are we talking in lots of quantity, or this is like consistent once a day over many, many years?
Consistent once a day over many, many years, but it's a balance. So if you're not taking in a lot of steamed green vegetables and eating, handful of nuts every day, you're not getting any magnesium or selenium or any of these other nutrients that are important to muscular function.
Right.
We are essentially, as the Bible suggests, salt of the earth, right? So these things are important to our function. I guess I've covered the thing about supplementation. There's other nutrients that are important to people. I carry at the clinic a lot of, not a lot, but a number of Chinese herbs that are tried and true and that have been used for thousands of years in China. These are Chinese herbal decoctions where they boil herbs and then they dry it and they distill it and dry it, and you get the essence of whatever herb it is, like whether it's ginseng, astragalus, these types of herbs that are used to help people heal. Penalia, I mean, that helps to dry things out. Again, I could go on about that, but
now we'll shift to say I used to ask people what they tell themselves at 18. But then I realized that a lot of people are quite content with where they are. And if they change their course of life at 18, they wouldn't be where they are. So what would you tell a random 18-year-old if you could give advice based off of where you are now?
I would say find something that you enjoy doing, whatever it is, and do it. I would say work towards doing it. I would say be careful about unmoderate behaviors, or moderation is the key to
extremes.
Yeah. Avoid extremes because it's dangerous. If you drink too much and drive, you're going to hurt yourself,
right,
or other people,
right.
If you spend too much time in your bedroom watching videotapes or TikTok, you're going to become passive and slothful, if you will. Yep. One of the 7 deadly sins. So you want to stay focused. Find something that makes you feel purposeful, and do that. If you do something that's purposeful, the money will come, the satisfaction will come. If you do something that you don't like, you're not going to be happy, even though it might bring you a king's ransom. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have purpose, you have nothing.
Right.
I've seen this.
Beautiful. Let's change gears to Winnipeg a little bit here. Let's talk about Winnipeg. You were born and raised in Winnipeg.
Yes.
You stayed in Winnipeg.
I did.
What kept you here?
Well, that's a pretty easy question to answer. I think I can speak generally about that, but most specifically, my family's here. My parents are here. So, and my dad's practice was here. So I came back and practiced with him. And that really gave me, that was the fast track to learning and being successful early in my life. And I thank God for that. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am without my parents and my siblings, for that matter.
So give me both sides of the coin. What do you love about Winnipeg, and what could change?
What I have loved about Winnipeg, but I see it changing very quickly, is the degrees of separation. I mean, if I go into a room with 100 people, 10 of those people are probably going to know who I am. So there's only 2 degrees of separation in Winnipeg. So there's a certain kind of town kind of small town kind of feel about Winnipeg, and that there's a certain comfort in that. So, for example, if we go to the squash club and we interact with 50 guys, well, those 50 guys know 1,000 people, and you basically know the whole city. Bingo, bango. They know you from there. You know everybody, or they know of you,
right?
Or potentially could know of you. Right. It's not the same thing in cities. Well, cities like Toronto.
Yeah.
And there's a certain kind of charm, a certain kind of simple charm about Winnipeggers. And like any smallish city in in Canada, you get the same type of feeling. Bigger cities like Vancouver, there's a certain kind of disparateness. It's spread out too much, and there's not that degree of separation. So it's harder to kind of get a footing there. The lovely thing about Winnipeg is that if, like yourself, if you do podcasts or you have your Emmett Leo homes and your prestige, you build your prestigious homes, people are going to know who you are, and very, very quickly. So there's a value to that. If you're steadfast, if you're true to what you do, people will know you, and they will appreciate your reputation. Will become eminent very quickly. And and once you have, if you've established a reputation that is seen as being reasonably good, it's easy to kind of ride that wave.
For people, what would you tell people when they're coming into Winnipeg? What's a few things that you would say that they would have to see or visit, or places to go?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I haven't come into Winnipeg being a non-Winnipegger. Yeah, non-Winnipegger. I would say I would go to places like the Assiniboine Park or the Museum of Human Rights. Yep. The Forks. Get a feeling for the city.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about this city, though. There seems to be a little bit of degradation taking place that is creating a little bit of fear in people to go downtown at any particular point in time, and it's the scourge of methamphetamine and opiate addiction.
Yep.
I don't know what the answer is to that, because it's hard to deal with dark forces unless you fight the darkness with darkness. It's hard to do that. So I'm concerned about the path that Winnipeg is on, but I don't think that's different than any other major center in Winnipeg or in North America for that matter.
Right. Changing gears a bit, how do you approach balance in your life? So you studied like crazy, then you worked like crazy, you had kids. Were you intentional about balance? Was that something that you thought about, or is that something that you still?
It eludes me. I think that 20 years ago, there was no balance in my life. I was at one point in time, I was on the board of governors for the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. I was on the board of governors at the Canadian Chiropractic Association. I was studying for my fellowship, and I ran a full-time practice. So, and I was also on the board. I was the chairman of the board of the St. James Biz at one point in time, all at the same time. It was absurd. I flew to Toronto like 30, 40 times in 1 year for my studies or for the political stuff that I was involved in. It was absolutely crazy. But I had the freedom. I didn't have children at that time. And then I moved, when I moved quickly into having, not quickly, but when I moved into having children after these things had gone, I dealt with some of those responsibilities. I focused on my kids at that point in time.
Yeah.
And children are interesting in terms of throwing you off balance and you having to find your balance again.
Really throw off my poker game.
Yeah. So it becomes extremely important that you find that you are secure in your balance. So, I mean, my life is very well structured now. I go to the squash club twice or thrice a week. I'm not working out all the time, but for social reasons and physical reasons to work out. Not excessively, by the way. And I have a nap every day at 12 o'clock, or right after I finish work, and in the morning. I work now about 28 hours a week. And with a view to success, having my associates succeed me. But I probably plan on keeping my finger in the pie. I had children at an older age, so I probably, and they helped me create balance in my life for me, but I have to try to be balanced for them, right? So that's what I'm creating. And it's all good. I enjoy, cooking, and that helps me. That helps bring me down.
Are you a morning guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wake up every morning at 6:30.
I wake up every morning.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I get up every morning at 6:30, and I've got there's a hormone in our body called cortisol that is high in the morning, and I ride that until 12, and then it has a diurnal wave, right? So it's high at 12 o'clock, it starts to wane. That's probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock when I have a nap, and then after a 20 or 30 minute nap, I wake up, and then the cortisol starts to rise again, and you go. It's not quite as high, and you go into the second part of the day. Yeah, it's a good life, good balance now.
I'm still trying to get that cold plunge. Still trying to get the cold plunge into the squash club.
Yeah. We need a cold plunge, and that creates a phenomenon called hormesis. So when you go from a sauna or a steam room that's hot and you jump into cold water, it has a profound effect on your immune function.
Yeah.
And just clarity, if you will, pushes all the blood into the peripheral parts of your body.
I'm working on it. I'll get it in there.
There should be a place in Winnipeg where we have a sauna or a steam room right beside a cold pool, and you step out of the room and you jump in. With the greatest respect to Thermea, they do have cold pools. I get that, but the sauna is not hot enough. Like it's got to be hot.
Like I think there's one one little steam room now we're very, very spoiled with the steam room at the squash club.
Yeah.
That thing
There's no question.
It's second to none.
No, second to none. Best in Canada.
Yeah, it's incredible. So it definitely is hard to compare. But if we could get a cold plunge right next to it,
that would be perfect.
Oh, I'm working on it.
You should get on the board and we should work on that. Just dig a hole in the change room for
I don't need that in my life.
Yeah.
So you knew you were coming here. You knew we were going to talk. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have that you wanted to talk about?
I think the only thing I might add is the spiritual side of my life and how that's evolved.
Let's dive in. So
when I was a young man, I was worried that I would go to hell forever because I was, interested in girls and sundry other things. Mm-hmm.
Was that how you were raised?
No, my parents were kind of liberal philosophers, if you will. They would go to the Unitarian Church when I was a kid.
Okay.
And they had a very liberal interpretation of Judeo-Christian philosophy. I wasn't quite sure that they were, structured enough. And I had a friend who lived in the next street over who reminded me that I was going to go to hell forever if I didn't straighten my behavior out. And I thought, well, I took on the mantle and I thought to myself, I better save my soul. So I went to church for a year. One of the things that I did well when I was a kid is I attended things very obsessively. So, for example, in high school, I had perfect attendance for 3 years in a row, except for one class where I got kicked out of phys ed in grade 10 for fighting with a colleague of mine there, and it was like 20 minutes left in the class, and the teacher kicked me out, and I said, "You can't do this to me," right? So that's the one class I missed in high school, one. And I went to get back to I went to church at a Protestant church in St. James for a year, trying to establish a foothold in, the righteousness of Christian philosophy, Christian theology. Okay. And I must say, my vision of the church was shot down in flames when I kind of, there's two things that were kind of bothering me a bit. What I saw was a bunch of a little bit of hypocrisy, if not a lot of it.
I was going to say a little.
So I didn't feel I didn't feel people were kind of honestly and genuinely devout about their spiritual purposes. Mm-hmm. And then when I was confirmed, the fellow who was reading my confirmation information mispronounced my name, and he called me George Koss rather than Gregory. And I thought that was a sign, literally a sign from God, that I have to keep looking, right? So I'm not actually confirmed into the United Church of Canada with the name Gregory. It was George. It's just pathetic.
I'm going to be calling you George.
Yeah, no, don't do that. So after that, when I entered university, there was kind of a broader, obviously you're in kind of a intellectual liberal arts kind of secular style thing. I started reading books by a fellow named John Lilly and a French poet named Antoine Artaud, and another Mexican spiritualist named Carlos Castaneda. Okay. And these guys came to spiritual realization, although it may not have been a Judeo-Christian thing. They came to it through the use of psychedelics. Now, while I've never taken psychedelics, I had a feeling for what their philosophy. And then I started studying people that had more secular Christian ideals. I can't remember the name of the author offhand, but really impressed me. And then one day I trusted in the canonized versions of the Bible and the New Testament. And I read it more for its philosophy and its psychological underpinnings, the value of it from a psychological point of view and a human experience point of view. Now, my faith is evolving, but I have a tremendous amount of faith, and I recognize the value of that. If not a first stepping stone, you can't step off a cliff and fly unless you have faith. There's been a litany of books that I've read that have impressed the spiritual side of my life. And clearly, much of it leads back to the interpretation of the New Testament and the Old Testament. But as I was saying, if I grew up in Southeast Asia, I might be steeped in Buddhist mysticism. Mm-hmm. If I grew up in Israel, I might be steeped in Semitic philosophy. Mm-hmm. But I grew up in North America, and the canvas on which my spiritual life has been painted is basically steeped in Christian philosophy as an underpinning, right? So I spend a lot of time trying to understand how the teachings in the New Testament relate to human psychology and human behavior. Now, there's some argument to be made as to, where do you draw the line in terms of do you define yourself as a Christian? And I will lean on a quote not a quote, but a statement that Bono made once. Bono of U2, he said, somebody asked him, are you a Christian? He said, well, I don't know because I can't live up to it. And he's being a bit facetious, but the point being is that I'm using that as a stepping stone to try to understand the human condition. And it's one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about and modeling my ideas and my behavior. And Lord knows that I am not a perfect man, so I fall far from grace. And our obligation, according to Christ, is to be perfect. Mm. So, but the point being is aim for perfection. You may fall short, but at least you're moving in the right direction.
Right. I grew up very religious, and my family was very religious. And when I was having kind of in my darker days, I remember having a talk with my dad. My dad he wasn't a pastor, but my dad was a deacon in the church, and very revered by those around him, and would go to him for advice, and they still do. And family and friends, they still seek his advice. But it was always from a biblical perspective, which he would kind of give more my mom. My dad would sometimes be able to know his audience and speak to them a little more appropriately. But I remember when my dad told me, Dan, church is bullshit. And it blew my mind. I was like, excuse me? And he was like, churches are places, and needless to say, we went to church, right? But a lot of the time, churches are exactly that. Was exactly people's practice, or people practicing religion in front of others, or for them to see that they were doing, and not practicing what they're preaching. And the hypocrisy of mankind is incredible at times. And so when we started talking about the Bible, and he was saying, listen, the Bible is a guide to live well.
This is the point.
Yeah. You read the Bible to live a good life. And if you follow what's in the Bible, you'll live a good life. And I noticed that too a lot in my education and my getting more learned about awareness and self-improvement and everything. Is a lot of it, almost all of it, is just it goes back to the Bible.
Following something. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of what Tony Robbins teaches, a lot of, what Robin Sharma teaches, a lot of everything. It's just, it's almost just packaged differently.
It is.
And then, whoever you resonate with or the message communicates properly to you, that's kind of who you decide to listen to. But yeah, it's all, a lot of it, almost all of it is there on how to live a good life.
It's a great way that you've just described that in terms of how the packaging of an idea. The simple fact is that different people, it's different philosophy, different ways of expressing philosophy resonate better with you or with I or with whoever's listening to it. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate what your father said about the church, that some of it's BS, because the fact is that the more people you get together in the same room, the greater, there's a high probability that you're going to be experiencing a greater degree of hypocrisy. Mm. But as Christ said, to gather together in my name, and there I shall be also. Then the point is that we're in church right now because we're sitting here talking about it.
Yeah.
That is profound. Like, that's a profound thing for Christ to say, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So here we are. And we do this to bear witness to our each of our thoughts, so that we can hold each other accountable to moving towards something that is more perfect.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful.
And you, do you find that, was there ever a time that you weren't, because you started that relatively early, that was in your teens that you started? Okay,
17.
so that's really had just a profound overlying theme in your life on how to guide your decisions and your value system. And
again,
did you ever step away?
Clearly, I am not perfect.
Yeah?
I would say that it was always the third rail. Okay. the one that was providing an energetic force, if you will.
Yeah.
To the movement.
Yep.
in my life.
Well, I can say that I definitely I veered off for a while. I don't know if it was just because they pushed too hard, or I don't know what it was, but I kind of stepped away from spirituality, or from religion, we'll say. I always kind of had that, belief in spirituality and that there was a higher power, but my wife has always had this underlying
force
where she has that it's never waned as far as just her spirituality and understanding, and I knew that that when I met her, it was I got to see somebody that just lives by it and understands that, of just like practicing what they preach. And like, it was pretty intense, pretty awesome.
Some people walk comfortably through the valley, and some cause themselves to suffer and go over the mountain.
Yeah.
That's the way it works.
Yeah. No. Now this is just, I think this would be awesome, is if you had a show where you legitimately just talked for like 15 to 20 minutes a day about something. I find the way that you explain stuff and very complex issues, especially with the body, I think it would do incredibly well. I think that people would listen, and I think it would be great. So, unsolicited advice.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but perhaps you can help me set up all this incredible equipment so I can be as important as you are.
Yeah, this is here. This is, I think it would be great, because I think that you have a very the depth of knowledge, but also the experience that goes with it, and your ability to explain to people what the problem is just awesome. So I think that would go very well. How do people find you online? How do they contact you?
Probably the easiest way would just be to Google my name, and it'll bring you to either the chiropractic website or to RateMDs, or to, if they Google my name, Koss, K-O-S, and Gregory, they'll find me.
What can they expect when they're first coming?
What, to see me as a professional?
Yeah.
If I'm not exceptionally busy and I've had a good day, I'll probably be very present and give them my time to help them find a better way to live.
Yeah. Well, I'm a testament to it, and that's why you're here. And I think that anyone who's looking for a painful body solution it would be in some really good hands by going to see you. So thanks so much for sharing your time with us.
It's my pleasure, Daniel.
Your experience, and you are welcome back anytime if you ever want to do this again. So you let me know. But this was fantastic, and I thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank all the people for listening.